Welcome back to State View Analysis. I'm your host, John San. Today, on January 20th, brought a sharp shift in global politics when President Donald Trump made it clear that the United States will not step back from its position on Greenland. The words were direct and deliberate. There was no suggestion of flexibility. For Washington and for Europe, the message signaled that the Arctic is no longer a distant concern. It is now at the center of power politics. Trump's comments surfaced as world leaders gathered in Davos for the annual World Economic Forum. In private meetings and public conversations around the event, Greenland became a recurring topic. The president emphasized that U.S. strategic interests come first, and that national security considerations outweigh diplomatic discomfort. From the U.S. perspective, this is not a symbolic debate. It is about long-term positioning in a rapidly changing region. Greenland is formally tied to Denmark, but geography gives it global importance. Sitting deep in the Arctic, the island holds strategic value for future shipping routes, missile defense systems, and access to critical minerals. As Arctic ice continues to thin due to climate shifts, routes that were once blocked are slowly opening. Control and influence in this region are becoming more valuable by the year. For the United States, this is not a future concern. It is a present competition. The Trump administration's view is shaped by broader global trends. Russia has expanded its military presence in the Arctic. China has openly described itself as a near-Arctic state and increased its interest in polar trade routes and resources. Against this backdrop, U.S. officials argue that failing to secure influence around Greenland could weaken America's strategic position in the decades ahead. Europe's reaction on January 20th was swift. Danish officials rejected the approach outright, calling it unacceptable. Other European leaders warned that economic pressure and tariff threats undermine alliance norms. Their concern is not limited to trade. Transatlantic cooperation rests on trust built through NATO, shared security commitments, and intelligence cooperation. When pressure replaces dialogue, those foundations can begin to crack. According to Reuters, European governments have already started internal discussions about how to respond if U.S. pressure increases. These talks are not just political. They include economic scenarios and coordinated policy options. The fact that such planning is underway highlights how seriously Trump's words were taken. Financial markets also reacted. Whenever tariffs and trade disputes enter the conversation, uncertainty follows. On January 20th, investors showed caution. Risk assets faced pressure, while demand for safer assets increased. The movement reflected concern rather than panic, but the signal was clear. Policy uncertainty carries economic consequences. Supporters of Trump argue that this firm stance shows leadership. In their view, previous administrations allowed strategic regions to drift while rivals moved in. They see the Greenland position as a correction, a message that the United States intends to protect its interests even when allies are uncomfortable. Critics see it differently. They warn that pressure tactics may bring short-term leverage but create long-term costs. Europe remains a key partner for the United States, not just economically, but militarily and diplomatically. A dispute that escalates beyond rhetoric could complicate cooperation across multiple fronts. U.S. Treasury officials struck a calmer tone on January 20th, saying that U.S.-Europe relations remain strong and that there is room for dialogue. They urged observers not to confuse firm positioning with the end of diplomacy. From their perspective, negotiation channels are still open. Even so, language matters. When a president says there is no going back, it signals limited room to maneuver. European leaders understand that as well, which explains the increasingly vocal pushback. The conversation has shifted from quiet diplomacy to public positioning. The Greenland issue has now expanded beyond a bilateral concern between the U.S. and Denmark. It is tied to the European Union's broader Arctic strategy. EU officials are openly discussing investments in Arctic security and infrastructure. These moves suggest that Europe is preparing for a more contested northern region. For Americans, the implications are practical. Trade tensions can influence prices. Strained alliances can affect global stability. Increased Arctic competition can shift defense priorities and spending. What happens around Greenland does not stay isolated. It connects to everyday economic and security outcomes. Greenland has become a symbol of how future conflicts may unfold, not over traditional borders, but over resources, routes, and geography shaped by climate change and global rivalry. Trump's January 20th stance offers a clear glimpse into that future. This story is still developing. Europe's next steps, Washington's follow-up actions, and market reactions will determine whether this moment fades or marks a lasting shift. One thing is already certain. Greenland is no longer just an island on the map. It has become a test of global power balance in a changing world.